Today is it May? May 3rd, 2024. My name's Tim, the BTWN guy, and you're watching BTWN News, which, truth, context, MacArthur, and PTSD. What is the truth? What did he actually say? What was the context? And we're even going to get opinions from others. And we are going to talk about what MacArthur thinks if you disagree with him on this topic. So what happened in a Q&A, and there's a lot of personalities responding to what Pastor John had to say. The internet, as Dr. James White said, has MacArthur broke the internet with his comments. And the response videos and those who are weighing in with their opinions, there are many people who are weighing in. So what's the truth? What's the context? Full context. So let's listen to the full context. All right? Everybody calm down. Everybody calm down. All right? It's going to be okay. Here's the context. Now, I have sped up the speed of the playback to 1.5. We will be able to understand clearly everything that's said, but I like to listen to it a little bit quicker. So here it is, the Q&A panel for the Valley. This is Grace Church of the Valley. MacArthur was there with Costi Hinn and others doing a conference, and within that conference there was a Q&A. And this is the question that was asked, and here is Pastor John's full context. I may stop it, give a little comments. I may not. I may wait till the end. Here we go.
I want to ask you a question here. He's written a lot of books, but his last book was The War on Children. Help our families navigate with the day we live in, and why you even wrote that.
Well, it's a combination of things. Just to lay it out simply, kids are sinful. I have great-grandchildren, and by the time they're 3 or 4, their sin nature is starting to be manifest.
Wait, even in your grandchildren?
Even in my...
Okay.
So kids are sinful. Then you add to that the sins of the fathers are visited on the generations, the 3rd and 4th generation. What does that mean? Simply means that the sinful characteristics of a given generation pass on to the subsequent generations. So that it's kids who basically have a sin nature to start with, and they have an inherited sin culture that they have to navigate and deal with. That ought to be enough. But this culture has taken it a step further, and they are now targeting children. The homosexuals say, we're coming after your kids. They're not trying to protect them. They're targeting them in the schools. They're targeting them through the media. Disney and companies like that develop child entertainment are targeting children for really what amounts to moral and spiritual destruction. So this is a war on the children. I was thinking about another part of it the other day. I was reading a book, interesting book called A Profession Without Reason. It's a book that shows basically, this is pretty shocking to some of you, that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they've been telling for the last 100 years. And the major noble lie is there is such a thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new. You have Thomas Szasz back in the 1950s writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness. There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies to basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You were fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinic clinically define that. You can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. So the book deals with the ways in which children are being assaulted, and they're formidable because they're done by media, and they're in the hand of every kid through the cell phone. So the church has got to step up. We started a campaign called Grace for the Children. If you want to strengthen the church, and I know it's true here, if you want to strengthen the church, minister to the children. Let the parents know you're going to work to protect the children, which is the parents' greatest concern. So I wrote the book along those lines. I was telling the guys earlier that several Christian publishers passed on it, they wouldn't publish it, which shows you how woke even Christian publishing has become.
Yeah, you're saying that because if your name is on it, that book will do well, and they passed even on a business opportunity.
Yeah. If you sell 10,000 books, the publishers make money. That's good. In a first printing like this of 75,000 books, that's a huge financial benefit to a publisher. But they don't want that, because again, we're back to what we've been talking about. They're trying not to offend the culture.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I think that we are running out of time.
There you go. There's the context. Now, if you agree with Pastor John MacArthur, stick around. If you don't agree with Pastor John MacArthur, stick around, because I'm going to address, and actually they address, you on terms of disagreeing and how we should disagree. The Q&A is only 41 minutes long, and it's excellent. I've listened to it many times. It even talks about whether or not you should listen to me, somebody who gives commentary on Christian content and things that are going on in the world. Here on YouTube, they talk about that, and it's very interesting. But let me first take this you here, okay? Because I looked it up. PTSD didn't exist, wasn't even a term until 1980, and even now they're moving away from the term PTSD as a diagnosis. They're tweaking it a bit. And as Pastor John MacArthur said, his position is not something that's new, and he's actually quoting from a book, A Profession Without Reason, which is what caused him to bring this up during the Q&A and put it in his book, I'm sure. Nothing new here, nothing new, folks. This has been Pastor John MacArthur's position for quite a long time, and I agree with most of it, if not all of it, but most of it. And if you think about life from a biblical perspective, I think you should agree with it as well. Here's a comment on Twitter. Tom Buck: how did Paul ever make it without medication and trauma counseling? Paul says in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes less one. 3 times I've been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I shipwrecked. A night and a day have I spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers from the city, dangers from the desolate places, dangers from sea, dangers from false brothers. I have been in labor and hardship, in many sleepless nights, in starvation and thirst, often hungry, in cold and without enough clothing. Pastor Tom Buck says, how did Paul make it without medication. Because Paul is the one who said in Philippians 4, verses 11, 12, and 13, I'm not saying these things because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Some of those thoughts in regards to mental health and the need for medication. Now, I'll say for myself, before I played, this is earlier in the Q&A. Earlier in the Q&A, the gentleman on the far right, he asks a question about discernment and when do we separate from other people. And it's fascinating. Okay, so maybe you have discerned that Pastor John is wrong and you're right on mental health. Now, I agree with most of what Pastor John says, but I also believe that there are times when the brain as an organ malfunctions and people can benefit from medication. Now, I would agree with Pastor John that people are over-medicated and that pharma would like to control people with medication, and big pharma would like to make lots of money selling their medications to us. So I don't know if I don't know what Pastor John would say about the person whose brain organ is malfunctioning and a medication could help that brain function correctly. I don't know whether he would agree with me or disagree with me. Let's assume that he would disagree with me. Now, what do we do with that? I disagree with Pastor John. I can't have anything to do with him, or to what extent can I have fellowship with him? And maybe you're asking that question because people are going crazy over this topic. They actually address it. Here's the question. I'll sit and listen. You listen too.
From you is how do we sort through those things? How do we sort through those different issues in terms of what things are things that we break fellowship over? What kinds of things are things where we can put our arms around someone and say, hey, this is a brother. We just disagree on this doctrinal point or this issue. So how do you sort through those different issues and how do you navigate relationships within the family of faith where we maybe don't fully align on issues?
Yeah, I would say first of all that it's important to understand that this culture encroaches on everybody in a massive way, so that people are making decisions not based upon Scripture, but based upon how they think they can successfully engage the culture. So they're not willing to offend the culture. They want to give in to the culture, as if, and this is kind of what I'm addressing in the last two sessions. If you think that your ability to accept the culture and have the culture accept you has anything to do with the advance of the kingdom of God, you're mistaken. But that's what drives it. They don't want to offend the culture needlessly, and that needlessly can extend far beyond what it ought to. So at that point, there is necessarily going to be a shift in the intensity of relationships. It doesn't change how I feel about people, whether I consider them friends, have affection for them. But obviously, when everything is publicly discussed on the internet.
I appreciate this because you can think back at Pastor John with all Black Lives Matter stuff and critical race theory and people that John MacArthur is friends with, who he didn't come out and lambaste publicly, but he's friends with them. So he's talking about some of his friends here and how he maintains those relationships. And sometimes we sit back and think, I wonder why he does that or still has this, that, and the other relationship. And I think he helps us understand that here.
It's easy for people to appear to be pitted against each other. But I don't want, anything that is not a cardinal issue. I don't want to be the guy that broke fellowship with a fellow believer, a brother in Christ. But at the same time, I can't give in to the culture. The culture has no influence on me in terms of what I understand my ministry to be. But it does have this is the legacy of pragmatism. It's been around for 20 years or more. Being pragmatic, trying to reach the unconverted by some form of technique or style. It's gotten so severe now. You saw probably some of the stuff on the internet about Easter Sunday services. There were just, what was it? One of them was recently was a sword swallower, a male stripper, or something like that. Yeah. I mean, where's the end to that? As if that had anything to do with the kingdom.
I think Pastor John is mistaken on that one. That was not an Easter Sunday service. That was a men's conference. And I agree. What does it have to do with anything in the kingdom?
At all. So I think the first breach comes when people feel like they have to give in to the culture. That was huge with CRT and the racial hustlers and the race baiters. They wreaked havoc in evangelical leadership because people caved into that.
Now I'm going to keep playing this. Costi Hinn's going to weigh in. It's some really good stuff here. Listen.
I'll just kind of piggyback on that. From a local pastor standpoint, we use concentric circles with our elders. We talk about our core fundamentals, the things that we hold to, the friends that we're going to run with, the ministries and the missionaries we're going to support. And then you have other layers in the concentric circles. I'll give you an example of one just this past week. I would consider him maybe on the outer layers of my concentric circles. He is a Pentecostal pastor in my area. He has a woman pastor wife. We've had a lot of personal discussion about it. And yet, in our area, where there's a ton of mega churches and the multi-campus guy on a screen type stuff, one of the big church planters this week, real influential guy, had 1,000 people at his vision night for the church plant. He's planting out of a majorly influential church over in the East Valley. And he went rogue on abortion and started saying, well, there's cases and we need to have conversations. It's a hard pill to swallow. And it happened to be my Pentecostal friend there with his woman pastor wife, and we don't agree on those things, who hit this brother pretty hard and had a strong talk with him and said something publicly. And I said, you're in that seeker kind of mega church driven world. He's a church of 7,000 people, this Pentecostal brother, and loves the gospel, does not preach heresy, but we differ obviously on very important local church things. And I sent him a text and I said, why is it that you, my charismatic woman pastor wife friend over there from Mesa, why is it that you're going to be the other last man standing on this issue? Like, really? And he was laughing back. And we sort of have these chuckles. You're seeing guys who we certainly are across the aisle on major issues. Those are serious local church issues. But I think when you see those compromises, I look at those concentric circles and I'm thankful that he would say something. Now, would I put him in my pulpit and say, hey, come on the podcast and just share your view on ecclesiology? May it never be. Then there's other layers.
It's a good reason to use the word, McGannatot.
Yeah, it is.
Never on my podcast.
So those circles get tighter and tighter. And what this heightens for us is the importance of the local church. I love talking with my elders about these things. I love talking with friends. Johnny will regularly be in the pulpit. I was just with him there. We love to come here. So we try to not torch everyone and try to use those concentric circles. I think, Pastor John, you've been a great example of this. The podcast that the team did about Jack Hayford and your relationship. You went there to preach, but he wasn't exactly a regular during the equipping hour at Grace Community in the early days. And so there's layers to it, and you got to know when to fight on major issues and maybe when to put somebody in a different category and love them from a healthy distance would be just some of my thoughts.
It sounds like you're...
Good stuff. Link to watch the rest of this Q&A in the description of this video. Thanks for watching. If you want to see all my content before it drops on YouTube, consider supporting me on Ko-Fi. You can watch it before it drops here on YouTube and without the advertising. So that's pretty cool. I look forward to your comments. Did you appreciate this video? What is your view on what Pastor John had to say? And what other people are saying? I'll read it. And thank you. Have a good weekend. And until next video, may God bless you. See you.